out to security. If they went to a private contractor, they would have to do that. So it's opportune for Sheriff Ashley to be here with us and talk about his budget. And one of the big major things that's going to be a topic of discussion in future meetings is the School Resource Officer Program. And we also have a fundraiser coming up in relation to that program too. So
thank you, Ken, for
welcome to the show, Sheriff.
Happy to be with you, always am, and because you talk my language. In regards to school resource officers, first thing I want to say is we're so focused on that in the budget that we're forgetting what the real issue is that, and you certainly won't read this in print media, but we've cut $5.5 million, $5.6 million out of the last 5 years while our population's grown, while our crime has increased by 40%, our violent crime, while our tourists are coming back in record numbers, and while our calls for service have increased, just 47,000 additional calls for service in the last 4 years. And what I mean by that is each year, if you go to 2007, we had 162,000 calls for service. 2008, we had 173,000 calls for service. 2009, we actually had a drop of about 1% back to 172,000. The last 3 years, we went from 172 to 177 to 184 to 210,000 calls for service. And so those 21% increase in calls for service in the last 3 years, that requires a response. And certainly if our population was decreasing, if our crime was decreasing, and if our calls for service were decreasing, cuts in our budget would be in order. Certainly when those things are increasing, budget cuts are not in order. And if you look at government's primary responsibility as being public safety, police, fire, and ambulance, then I think if we get into priority-based budgeting, which we claim to do, then certainly law enforcement is on top of that list, according to our citizens at least. And that's who we do represent. School resource officers, I'm of the opinion I don't care if the revenue comes from the school board or whether it comes from the Board of County Commissioners, it's all tax dollars. So which governing body or taxing authority decides that, yes, I'm going to use the citizens' funds for this, doesn't really matter to me. The fact that those citizens, those 35,000 kids that attend schools are Okaloosa County citizens. Law enforcement's job, or primary job, is to protect the weak. The middle-aged man who's got his own, arsenal is not really needing the protection of law enforcement. It's the elderly and the young that don't know how to defend themselves that usually require most of our services. And so if you look at it from the perspective of what are the sheriff's priorities, what is law enforcement's priorities, I certainly believe that our children are the number one priority. And I was asked, well, this was self-imposed. Well, every deputy we put on the street is self-imposed. So whether I put them in a zone in Shalimar or whether I put them in a school in Shalimar, it's still where are our citizens located and who's in need of our services. So I don't think that argument or that holds water, to be frank.
Okay. It's just a question of the policies of the district has has different options in which they can use to provide security. They could even arm the teachers if they wanted to avoid the expense or minimize the expense. Let the teacher go armed. That's
Great point.
That's not their inclination. They've always been opposed to the right to carry for staff or teachers in the school. So the only alternative has been, and I think a popular outcry after the incident in Connecticut last December was the local populace here, especially parents, but I think a majority of the populace says when you offered to say, look, I can put people in there,
well,
they did not. They certainly didn't protest at that time.
No, and my email and letters to my office are 99% in favor of this. The only people I'm having issues with are politicians. Mm-hmm. And that's because of the funding issue. Nobody wants. You can go ask 100 citizens on do they want a tax increase, and 100 citizens are going to tell you no. But they also take the services that we provide, police, fire, and ambulance, for granted. The roads that we have to pay for granted, the infrastructure, communications, the list goes on and on. But when the service is not there, that's when the complaints come to my office, not the county commissioner's office. But I think we've gotten so sidetracked on the school resource officer issue that we're forgetting about the other crime issues.
You have other needs besides the addition. But how many additional staff did you put into the schools?
Well,
How many additional officers or officers did you transfer from other positions that you put into the schools?
26.
Okay.
26.
And those were existing officers that were moved from other positions to fill those slots?
Right, and the school
On an
district paid
as-needed
for
basis.
their half of that school year.
Okay.
So they provided additional funding for that half of the school year. Because, we started this in January, and it went through the end of school in June. And so they provided their half of the funding for that particular. We moved people out of civil process, out of our traffic unit, environmental unit. I mean, the list was long. Again, when they provide that funding, backfilling those positions, that's what I'm asking our Board of County Commissioners. I'm committed to this program, and I'm committed to having deputies in these zones across the district, these schools. So in order to backfill that traffic unit, the street crimes unit, the environmental unit, all those different units that we pulled from or did away with, if you look at the priority, is it more important to do traffic than it is to protect our kids? Is it more important to deal with any number of things that we deal with? And, again, if you say self-imposed, it's self-imposed when you put an officer on Eglin Parkway to do traffic. It's self-imposed anytime we use a law enforcement officer. So, again, what I'm looking at and what the print media refuses is putting this in context. The context is we should have been increasing our budget to meet the demand all along, not decreasing it as our crime grows and as our population grows and as our calls of service grows. So we boxed ourselves into this corner over the last 5 years. And whether you pay now or whether you pay later, it all comes due eventually. It's kind of like Detroit, where they kick the can down the road for the next city council to deal with, and the next city council to deal with, and the next city council, and 50 years later you're bankrupt because you don't pay the bills along the way.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the other budget needs. Some of the cuts you've made over the years, and still have to deal with the folks that you're trying to replace. Fill those empty seats that were moved to the schools.
Well, and one of those things are state mandates that come down. We don't have any control over. And I strongly suggest people look at the ECI and the CPI and those consumer price index, employee indexes, and the like. And retail prices alone tell people that I can't. It costs me more to have 10 deputies today or last year or the year before that or the year before that. That just the cost of insurance, the gasoline, ammo, everything, uniforms, everything costs more today than it did.
Hello.
And the state is certainly relieving itself of a lot of its obligations that it's had in the past. And I'll use lab work for one example. Is our Florida Department of Law Enforcement lab no longer does GSR kits, and that's gunshot residue, and so we have to outsource that to private labs at the behest of the state attorney's office, who's prosecuting the case. Hey, I need lab work on this, this, and this. Well, who's paying for that now? That's not been in our budget in years past. Is us. So it's $500 a hand. You do 2 hands, it's $1,000. You do 20 people, that's $20,000. And so it's that and some kinds of
Those in the past, you sent that off to the FDLE.
Yeah.
And they did it.
They did the analysis and they did the expert witnessing at trial. Well, if we outsource it to a private lab, who's paying for the lab analysis?
His time when he goes in to
Yeah.
testify.
Well, we won't have to do that. I hope the state attorney's office is
will
picking
pick
that
up that
up.
part.
Yes, but again, it's those things that get pushed down from the state that no longer paid for by the state. The Department of Juvenile Justice and DCF and the list goes on. But again, we've not replaced capital needs, repairs to vehicles continue to increase 80% because we haven't replaced vehicles. And I hear about the take-home car program. I've heard that, and almost every law enforcement agency in our country uses the take-home car fleet program. And there's a ton of studies on fleet programs and what's most efficient and what's most cost-effective. And almost every one of them describe the take-home car vehicle as more efficient and more cost-efficient. And this is the reason why. A 24/7 fleet program costs you more because you have to replace those cars much quicker. If a car is running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the transmissions, the tires, the engine, everything fails quicker, and you put more miles on it quicker. So if you got 3 shifts running a vehicle and you've got 150,000 miles in 2 to 3 years, you've got to replace that car. Whereas on our 5-6 year plan on the take-home car fleet, it's not just a force multiplier, it's also a management tool, and it's also a crime prevention tool. Without those cars,
Always good to have those teenagers see the deputy's car at the far end of the block, right?
yes, you know, in a
All right, we got to get out here for a break. We'll be back.